Well, some of you that know me, or if you don't, this is going to be news maybe. I'm a little bit of a nerd. I like nerdy things. I like nerd culture. I like superheroes and comic books and fantasy and sci-fi, Star Wars. Anybody Star Wars fans? And by the way, yes, I like all the movies. They're all good because they're all Star Wars, and it's okay. I like the Marvel superheroes and the DC superheroes and the comic books and all of that stuff, right? I like Lord of the Rings. And matter of fact, if you know the name of my youngest daughter, you'll know I really like Lord of the Rings. And matter of fact, what's really cool is for us super like fantasy nerds, today is September 22nd, which is a very, very, very special day. It just so happens to be Hobbit Day. It is a day that is specially celebrated for Lord of the Rings nerds around the world for Hobbit Day. It also happens to be my daughter's birthday, so there's that. But it is a very, very special day. So my daughter, named after one of the characters from Lord of the Rings, also happens to be born on Hobbit Day. So couldn't have planned that any better. One of the things that I really enjoy, though, in my greater nerd culture, if you will, is my wife and I have really enjoyed doing board gaming. And we've gotten into doing some strategic board gaming and that type of thing over the last 7 or 8 years. It's been something really enjoyable. But one of the things that we really like, and one of my favorite style of board games, is a game called an open world style of game. Now, they make these in video game form, and they also make these in even more nerdy form on table-based games, where you literally put a book out and a map out, and you're moving pieces around, and things like Dungeons and Dragons that some people have played. Although that's a next level of nerdiness that I haven't quite gotten to. But one of these things I really love are these open-world games, and one of the things that you do in these games is there's an ultimate mission that you're sort of trying to accomplish way down the road. But in order to get there, you have to move around and you have to interact with people. And there's even times when you'll move you'll play around the map, and when you get to this spot, it'll tell you, open up this book and you read this special scenario. It'll tell you, oh, you interacted with such and such, the mind nymph, and you have to go on his little journey. And what you do is you end up taking what we call side quests. And a side quest is an opportunity for you to go and not deviate from the mission, but sort of take a little bit step to the side, accomplish something that will ultimately give you something that brings you closer to the further mission. Well, this morning, we're going to take a little side quest. We've been in the book of Daniel for the last several weeks and months, and it's been a wonderful, wonderful story. By the way, I just remembered, since there is no clock back there, I better start so I know what time I've got. No, I stopped the timer. There we go. So we've been in the book of Revelation, and it's been a wonderful study. I've really, really enjoyed it. And a few weeks ago, when Chad and I were talking about him leaving and me speaking, and I thought, well, I could go ahead and do the next part of Revelation. But two things. One, Chad has poured his heart and soul into this study, and his current mind knowledge of where he's at is way surpassing what I've got on Revelation right now. He has really just poured himself into it, and what he gives, on Sunday morning is a piece of what he's really poured in. So he is very well equipped to handle those chapters. The second thing is just, quite frankly, I thought he might be the one that you guys can all be mad at, and you can just be happy with me. Since he's the one doing the controversial stuff in Revelation, I figured I would scoot off of that for a minute. But no, so we are going to actually go into the book of Daniel. And Kyle read for us our scripture passage this morning. But you see, the book of Daniel is a fitting side quest, if you will, to Revelation. A lot of people that study Revelation actually do so in conjunction with the book of Daniel. And specifically, the last kind of half of Daniel, where Daniel gets into some prophecies and that type of thing. We won't be there this morning. We'll be in the first couple of chapters. But nevertheless, Daniel is a book that goes hand in hand with our study in Revelation. And the ultimate message is the same message. Through the book of Revelation, we've been sort of going towards one mission, and we talked about it in the very first couple of messages that Chad did from Revelation. And that was that ultimately, regardless of how all this other stuff pans out, which, by the way, where's Van? Van is he told me the other day, my pan-millennialist. It's all going to pan out in the end. Regardless of how it all pans out, we know one thing to be sure, and that is Jesus is king, Jesus wins. And that no matter what we do on this earth, no matter our best laid plans, no matter how hard we try, Jesus ultimately wins in the end. That's the mission, right? That's the main sort of what we're working towards. And although we might sort of disagree on some of the things that happen in Revelation talk about some side quests. There's a lot of little side quests in Revelation. Ultimately, we're headed to the same path. And this morning, we're going to keep that main path in mind. But while we do that, I want us to take and look at the life of Daniel and how it influences how we view that end main result. I'm going to give you sort of our main overall point this morning, and then we're going to backtrack. We're going to do something different. I'm going to give you the end. I'm going to go back to the beginning of Daniel. We're going to work our way back. Our main point this morning is very simple. We must take the necessary steps to position ourselves in front of God and the world to give them the answers when the time is right. So I don't know if you picked up on it or not, but let me give a quick recap of the passage that Kyle read for us this morning. That passage, if you don't know, was a really unique spot where Daniel had gone to the king of Nebuchadnezzar, and he had told him what his dream meant that he had. So remember that. We'll get back to that bit in just a little bit. But what I want us to see is that opportunity that Daniel took, when Daniel was able to give that interpretation of the dream, and he talked about actually, Doug, if you can put that picture up here real quick. I know I'm jumping ahead real quick, but there's a picture, and this is man's best representation, but this is essentially the dream that old Neb had, and he saw this statue, and he saw a head of gold, and on down the statue there was different materials that was made out of, each one weaker than the next. Daniel was able to give him that dream and tell him the interpretation of it. All right, so remember that piece. But I want us to remember that Daniel had to get to that point first. So let's talk about this morning how Daniel got to the point where he had the opportunity to tell one of the greatest men, when I say great, I mean world-renowned, greatest men in history, how Daniel had an opportunity to tell one of the greatest men in history the story of how God can save him. So let's set the tone for a minute. Before we get back to this, we've got to step back a little bit and see what we're talking about. So, Daniel was an Israelite. And in the time where this story is written and takes place, Daniel's nation has been conquered by Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar at the time was one of the most well-known, greatest conquerors, and he was sort of at the beginnings of his kingdom that he was establishing. And he was on an all-out tear to conquer the entire world that he could find. And one of those places he conquered was the children of Israel. So Nebuchadnezzar comes in and he ransacks Israel. He destroys the temple. He tears down the walls. The people of Israel are decimated. But what he does after that is really sort of unique to something that Nebuchadnezzar did and many other nations after him learned from. And that was this. You see, if you're Nebuchadnezzar and you're trying to rule over this large group of people, you want to prevent uprisings. That's the biggest thing you got to worry about. You start off with a little nation, and then you start conquering. Well, now all of a sudden, the nations that you've conquered are more in number than your nation itself. Sort of like what the Israelites went through when they were in Egypt. Remember, that's why the Egyptians so hated them, because they had grown in so much number they posed a threat. So how do you stop your conquered people from becoming a threat? Well, Nebuchadnezzar came up with a unique and really cool plan. So he decided that in order to best suit keeping uprisings from happening, what he was going to do is he was going to take some specific people from each place that he conquered, and he was going to set them up as high, lifted up people in his kingdom. So what he did was he went in, and when he conquered Israel, he said, all right, I want you to find me the best and the brightest, the young talent. I want you to find me the good-looking, the smart, maybe the middle school, the high school kids that are cruising, they are going places. I want you to find them and specifically bring them back to my court, and we're going to take care of them. And you see, what he was doing was he was creating an opportunity for these young people to go into his court, into his training, and it was normally about a 3-year training plan that he had. And he was trying to assimilate these young Jews into Babylonian culture. And see, what this accomplished was the idea, and it worked really well. Matter of fact, it worked so well that the Roman Empire copied this exact same thing, and that's one of the reasons why they were so successful. You see, what they did was they worked really hard to assimilate this old culture into the new one. And so part of what happens at the beginning of Daniel chapter 1 is that Nebuchadnezzar is attempting to assimilate Daniel and his friends into Babylonian culture. So let's look at the book of Daniel, chapter 1. We'll read a couple of verses. Chapter 1, verse 8 through 9. It says, "But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. And God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chiefs of the eunuchs. As for these 4 youths," this is Daniel and his 3 friends, there's 4 of them together. This is verse 17, sorry, I skipped down. "As for these 4 youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom. And Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams." All right, so there's a little piece of that maybe you've connected, but we talked about the image that Daniel was able to describe to Nebuchadnezzar. Now, I want you to go back. This happens a chapter before, when Daniel is younger. This is when it tells us that Daniel got the ability to be able to describe the vision. All right, so hold on that for a minute, because there's some things that had to happen first before Daniel ever got to the point where he could describe this vision to Nebuchadnezzar. And let's see, the first thing that happens in the life of Daniel, in order to get to the point of having an opportunity to share with Nebuchadnezzar, I want you to see that Daniel refused to assimilate into the culture of the world that he was not supposed to be in. The application can kind of write itself, right? You see, Daniel was taken from a world that was his and was put into a world that he was not supposed to be in. And just like Daniel, you and I are existing in a world that we are not supposed to be in. You see, the world that we were supposed to be in was a world that was created perfect and beautiful, and then sin entered in and destroyed that world. Now that means that you and I are in a world that we should not be in. Now, obviously, back up. God's in control, right? So all that happened in his plan and providence. But humanly speaking, we exist in a place where we were never supposed to be. We were supposed to be in a beautiful, holy, perfect relationship with God our Father. He created us to be in beautiful relationship. We were made not just in his image, but in his image to have relationship with him. The part of the creation story is the first part of the gospel that tells us that God made us so that we could be in relationship with him. Now sin ripped that away. Now we exist in a world that we were not supposed to be a part of. You see, Daniel knew that he and his friends were different. He knew that he was not supposed to be in this place. He knew that he was called to a different upbringing. Daniel knew that his culture was a different culture. Now, what happens is Daniel goes to the men in charge, and they say, all right, we're making you part of Babylonian culture. Old King Neb says you're going to come and you're going to be a part, and we're going to make you like one of us. And Daniel says, wait, hold on a minute now. Everybody else was saying yes. You see, Daniel and his friends were not the only Jews that were taken into captivity. Daniel and his friends were not the only ones that were not supposed to be there. But Daniel and his friends were the only ones that said, hey, wait a minute. I think there's something wrong here. We're Jews. We've been given a special place. We're different. Our culture is different. Guys, I don't think we need to be a part of this. And Daniel very kindly and very lovingly says, hey, hold on a minute. I'm going to ask, instead of us being like you and taking your sacrifices to your idols and worshiping your gods, instead of being like you, I'm going to ask that you let us live like our culture says. Give us meat, or vegetables, and give us water. And he says, give you 10 days. And at the end of those 10 days, I want you to see, are we any better than the rest around us? And so the guy that was in charge sort of unwillingly was like, well, I guess we can do this. And sort of his head on the line, right? Like if these guys turn out to not do what they said they were going to do, he was the one on the chopping block. And old King Neb was going to come by and he was going to murder this guy because he didn't do his job. And so he stepped up. He said, all right, I'll give it to you. You guys want your culture? I'll give you 10 days. I'll give you 10 days to live like you think you're supposed to live. Well, what happens? The story is that Daniel and his friends decided to live like the culture that they knew they were supposed to be in. In the midst of others who were not. And they took the vegetables and they took the water, and at the end of 10 days, they were not only as healthy as they were going in, But they were even more healthy and even more robust than those that had been pouring in the meat and the sustenance. They were even more healthy. They were even more knowledgeable. You see, what happened is Daniel stepped out and said, I know that I'm put in a place where I'm not supposed to be. And guys, let me tell you, you and I are put into a place where we're not supposed to be. We're living in a world that was not created for us to be in, as far as sin goes, right? We're in a world in which we were not supposed to have to exist in, but now we do. And so are we going to be like the rest of the Israelites that were taken captive and say, well, I guess let's sort of merge in and fit in? And there's nothing wrong with eating the meat, right? Like, it's just meat. There's nothing wrong with doing that. We're just being a little bit like the Babylonians. We won't forget about our culture. It'll just be in the back of our brain somewhere. Or we'll be like these four beautiful people who stood up and said, you know what? I know that we're not in the place that we're supposed to be. I know that we were taken against our will into this land. But I don't want to forget where I came from. And I don't want to forget where I'm going. And so I ask us this morning, have we, like Daniel, decided to stand and say, look, I can live in this world because I'm meant to, but I also understand that I'm not supposed to be here and I'm supposed to be different. Have we decided, like Daniel, to stand up and say, you know what, I'm going to live here because this is where I've been put, but I'm going to live as God wants me to live in a world that I should not be a part of? I have citizenship to another kingdom somewhere, and I serve another king. You see, my power and my authority doesn't come from me being an American, an East Ellijay Baptistian. There's a new word. By the way, every time I speak, I always come up with a new word. So there was our new one for today, Baptistian. It's a good one. That's not who my identity. My reality is that I'm a part of God's kingdom. I live in a world in which I want to be honoring to Him and where He has called me to be. Not to the world. I'm not trying to be just like where I live. I'm trying to be just like where I'm going. But you see, what happened was a beautiful thing, because when Daniel and his friends decided to do that, what did God do? See, I think sometimes we like to look at this Christian life and we see, like in Revelation, we want to see one day victory's coming. And we sit down and we say, man, I'm excited for that victory one day. One day God's going to win. One day He's coming and we're going to follow along. But guys, let me tell you that the victory and the blessings of Jesus are not a one-day blessing. They're a now blessing. We talk about every Sunday at the beginning, and we say that we are part of experiencing the grace of God in His ongoing reign. That means that Jesus Christ, when He came down to this earth and He incarnated and became a man, He started winning again on this earth when He came to the cross. That means that you and I don't just experience one day victory, but we experience now victory. And here's what happens with Daniel when he experienced a now victory. Daniel experienced a now victory in verse 17 when it said that Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. Daniel was given gifts in this moment because he decided to live like his culture was supposed to live. He was given gifts that would one day save his life and the lives of countless others around him. But not just save his life. Daniel was given gifts that would ultimately lead to an opportunity for one of the most well-known men and his nation to get to see the kingdom of God. So in order to get to that place, Daniel, first of all, had to stand up in a culture to say, I'm not part of that culture. Daniel remembered, I exist to serve another God, not where I'm supposed to be right now. We'll get there later. And then we go to the next part of Daniel chapter 1 in verse 18 to 20. In verse 18 it says, at the end of the time when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, this is Daniel and his friends to sort of see how good they were. The chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar, and the king spoke with them, and among all of them, none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore, they stood before the king. They stood up, they stood out. They said, hey, we're going to take this vegetables and water, and now the king is verifying, you guys stood out, now you're in front of me. In verse 20 it says, "And in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were in his kingdom." I want us to see something really powerful right here. And we're going to almost maybe go a little contrary to what I just said. I just sort of harped on the fact that Daniel was very much adamant that he was living in another place, right? Now I want you to also see that in conjunction with that, Daniel chose to live with the power of God among people who would need that power. Here's what I want us to see this morning, that while Daniel knew that his ultimate obligation and his ultimate belonging was to a different world, Daniel didn't walk away from that world and go live as a hermit somewhere and just say, well, I'm just serving my king, and one day victory, you just step out. Daniel said, I've been given gifts, and I've been given an ability to show my God winning right now. And Daniel didn't step back. You see, Daniel stepped into the world in which he knew he wasn't supposed to be a part of to use the gifts that God had given him to further the kingdom of God. You see, Daniel would never have had the opportunity that we're going to get to in a minute when he goes and tells the dream. That would have never, ever happened had he have decided, you know what, I'm just going to step back. I'm not going to be a part of this king's court. No, you see, Daniel, when he was given an opportunity, Daniel stepped in and he showed out because God had given him something special. He had given him an ability to have visions and dreams and interpret those. And it said even that when Nebuchadnezzar saw him and that he heard from them, every question he asked them, he went, you know what? Not just are they good looking and smart, but they're smarter than everybody else I've got in my court. We're talking about people that he had acquired from all over the world at that time to come in and be part of his kingdom. And he says, these 4 stand out. And now when these 4 stand out, they didn't run away. They didn't get scared of being in a place that was not like them. They didn't get scared of living in a world that they knew they weren't a citizen of. Matter of fact, quite the opposite. They were emboldened to say, we have something from somewhere else that is going to help you. We have the answers that when you're asking, we're going to be able to give you. And so I ask us this morning, have we so far removed ourselves by saying, you know what, I'm not of this world, this isn't me. We've forgotten about the world around us that needs the answer of Jesus. Have we stepped out so much that we have forgotten that there are opportunities in everyday life to help others see the reign and the rule of God in their lives and in our lives? But we will never, ever, ever have those opportunities like Daniel had described in the dream. We will never have those if we pull ourselves out of this world that we are not a part of. We will never have the opportunity to share what God has done for us. We will never have the opportunity to point somebody to the ultimate answer that is Jesus. That will never exist if we exist outside of the world with the gifts and the power of God that he's given us to live in that place. See, we don't live in this place on our own accord. We don't live in this place because we have power in our own selves. No, we live in this place with the power of God on our lives. You see, this is important because we have a God that didn't stay in heaven when we needed him here on earth. We have a God that sent his son. We call it the incarnation. It's a fancy word that means God became a man. He dwelt among his creation, sacrificed himself, but didn't stop there. When he ascended back, he sent his spirit to us. That means that you and I now, just like Daniel was given these powers and these abilities to speak around, you and I, Christians, believers, we live in a world in which we don't live alone in a bubble, but we have the Holy Spirit, the power of God in and amongst us daily, so that we don't have to feel afraid for being in a world that we do not belong to. But furthermore, don't be afraid of living in that world, but be adamant that we belong somewhere else and being able to know that we have an opportunity to give that message of God's kingdom working for somebody else. You see, people are going to come to places in their lives where they realize that their own abilities are failing. I talked about at the beginning that creation says that we were made to be in relationship with him. This is a crude illustration, but if you think about it, we were made to be like this with God, right? In perfect harmony and relationship. Sin broke away that relationship. Sin entered. God could not be a part of sin. Now, we have holes in our lives. And we try to fill those gaps with everything we possibly can. We try our best plans to make ourselves fit and be happy and whole. And we're trying to find this again, but we're trying in our own ways. You know what? The people around you in this world that we're not supposed to be a part of, they're doing the same thing. People are trying to fill the gaps in their lives with things that will never, ever satisfy because they're missing the one thing that can actually make it happen. Guess who has the answer to those problems, guys? It's us. And we will never, ever, ever help people to be able to see like Nebuchadnezzar saw. We will never be able to help people see the truth of God and what he's done for them and how they can be whole and helped again. We'll never be able to help somebody see that if we live outside and we step back and we live like hermits and we don't put ourselves into places where others need the answers that we have to give. Daniel chose to live with the power of God amongst people that would need that power. We have been given amazing gifts from our Father in the terms of His Word, His Spirit, our communication with Him, and how we can help share that with others. Don't choose to take those things and run away, but choose to live like Daniel did, knowing that your citizenship is somewhere else, knowing that it exists somewhere else, but in the meantime, serving in that place so that others might see the same God that you serve. So that's a precursor to where we're going with the second half of our story. So these are all things that allowed Daniel to position himself in a place where now, at the end of this, what happens is King Nebuchadnezzar looks at these men and he says, wow, you are so great and you are so mighty. I am handpicking you to be in my court. You are going to be the wise of the wise. You're going to be my debutantes. You're going to be my advisors. You're going to be the ones I'm going to. You guys are something. But that never would have happened had Daniel not have gone out of his way to stand up in a place that he wasn't supposed to be and live for another culture, right? All right, so we've got that under control. Got that settled. Now let's move on to the second half of our story. So then in the second part of Daniel, we have Nebuchadnezzar having this dream. Nebuchadnezzar goes in the beginning of Daniel chapter 2, and he says, all right, I'm going to call all my wise men together. He brings them all in. He says, hey, guys, I need you to tell me what my dream just meant. And, of course, all these wise men sit around and they say, all right, go ahead. You tell us your dream, and we shall tell you what it means. And I can just imagine the pomp and the piousness of these men that felt themselves so high and so mighty. And old King Neb says, well, hey, there's a catch. I actually don't remember what I dreamt. And these men stand around and they say, oh, king, we might be good, but we ain't that good. And these men say, hey, King Nebuchadnezzar, just go ahead. Just give us a little piece. Give us a hint. Tell us. And he says, no, I don't know what I dreamt. You need to tell me what it was and then tell me what it meant. And these men, the wisest of the wise, stood up and said, I don't know. We're lost. I have no idea what you're talking about. And they say, not even the wisest of the wise is able to do that. Now, let me take a little backtrack here because I actually believe when this happened, and we'll get to this next main point in a second, but I actually believe that Nebuchadnezzar, now I'm going to step aside because this isn't Bible, right? This is Seth. I don't know that Nebuchadnezzar actually didn't remember his dream. Let me tell you why. I mean, maybe. He might have completely forgotten it. But the thing is that I believe from the moment that Nebuchadnezzar brought in these different, let's be honest, Daniel and his friends were very different than anybody that he had conquered before. And I think from that moment when he saw that these men were different, he was looking for truth. And what for Nebuchadnezzar would have been a better way to establish where truth was in the midst of all these wise men. Let's be honest, any one of us could make up some interpretation for some dream, right? Any one of these wise men could have said, well, yeah, your dream means this. But it took something special for somebody to be able to say, not only am I going to tell you what your dream meant, but I know what your thoughts were. And I'll be honest, I really think that there's an aspect of this where Nebuchadnezzar is really trying to find truth. Where he's really trying to say, all right, I'm going to challenge all of you, and I'm going to see, do you really have what it takes, or are you just fluffing it? And like I said, that's not in the Bible, but read between the lines a little bit. And it makes perfect sense that Nebuchadnezzar was just trying to test these men. And then he gets so angry at the end when they say, hey, we can't do it. Now imagine Nebuchadnezzar is trying so hard. Here's what I think, truthfully, to take a step further. Not only do I think he was trying to find truth, I think he was trying to go out of his way to disprove what he was already working in his heart, that God was the real God. I think he wanted so bad to make sure that wasn't true. I think he was doing everything he could to run away from what God was doing. He saw what God did in Daniel and his friends. He saw how God empowered them. He even says that he proclaims them to be God at one point in chapter 1. But I think he's trying so hard to run away from that, so that when these other wise men stand up and say, Neb, we can't do that. I think it was in that point that he got so angry because he was forced to reconcile that there was only one truth. And so what's he do? He says, death be to you all. And he says, I'm going to kill all of the wise men. So they come to Daniel's house, and the next part of our story is in Daniel chapter 2. And in verse 17 of Daniel chapter 2, it says, Then Daniel went to his house and made the matter known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, and told them to seek mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his companions might not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision in the night. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. All right, let's back up for a second. What's going on? This guy that Nebuchadnezzar is sent to go kill all these wise men has come, and he has found Daniel, and he says, Yo, Daniel, you guys are off. You got to go. I've been told I've got to kill you. And Daniel steps up and he says, whoa. Before you do that, Daniel steps out on a limb of faith. And the verses that precede this, you can go read it for yourself, but in the verses that precede that, Daniel says, wait, I will tell the king the dream and what it meant. Before Daniel has even gone out of his way to beg God for this massive miracle, Daniel has so much faith that he knows what his God is able to do. He says, don't kill us. Now, on the flip side, what's Daniel got to lose too, right? He gets a couple other days of life, right, at the very least. But he says, hey, I know my God can answer this, so before you off us, give us a chance. And so that's when this passage comes in. It says, then Daniel went to his house and made the matter known to his friends. Here's what I want us to see this morning. The next part of us being able to take opportunities to share about God. Daniel understood that the way God intended for us to live as Christians was to enlist the help of other believers. Once you see, Daniel got it. Daniel understood what it meant to truly live this life in light of the gospel. And again, I'm speaking even pre the fullness of the gospel even being realized. But Daniel knew that the power that was represented by being around your fellow believers and experiencing God with your fellow believers far surpassed any amount of checking a box by coming to church, checking a box by doing Sunday school, teaching. Daniel realized, come with me for a second, Daniel realized that the truth and the reality of how we grow and hear from God happens in small discipleship with other godly people that we put around us. Daniel understood the true path of discipleship was not walking in these back doors. Now, I said a minute ago that one of the reasons why I was excited about letting Chad continue Revelation was so you all could be upset at him and not me. I might end up negating that here in a minute, but I think so oftentimes we have missed what Daniel saw. And I think we have deceived ourselves into thinking so often that we're doing the work and that we're actually being good Christians by showing up and being able to set up some chairs and host an event real well. I think we've deceived ourselves so often into thinking that we're doing the work by coming in and, man, we're there like 3 out of 4 every Sundays. I mean, man, I'm doing great. Matter of fact, I even showed up for Sunday school twice this month. I am living the Christian life. And let me just, I'm talking to myself too, okay? I need it too. I'm telling you, it's so easy to say, look, I've scheduled these events and I've made all these things happen and we got together and we did some awesome things and we had an amazing team of people that showed up to help and look at all these things that we've done and look at the way that we come together. And how often are we convincing ourselves that we're actually being discipled and living the Christian life because we're good at running events, because we're good at setting up a trunk or treat. I'm all for it, and we're going to do it. It's going to be awesome. But have we convinced ourselves that that's the end goal? Have we convinced ourselves that by having tons of people just show up for events, that's the thing? Have we convinced ourselves that by showing up and checking a box and doing the activities, that's true growth and discipleship? All right, now, would you all please come and help set up events and help and set up chairs and tables? I'm being a little facetious, but honestly, those things are very, very important, right? There's a bigger picture, and I get that. I know I'm being a little facetious for real, but those things are truly important, and I don't diminish and downplay what those things accomplish, because there's a bigger picture, right? I get that. But the reality is I think we're missing the truth of what Daniel saw in this passage. You see, God did not give Daniel the answer by himself. You see, what did Daniel do? Daniel, when he knew there was a crisis, he didn't run away this way, but he said, gather around. Gather around, come here. We need to get down on our knees and we need to pray right now. And I need all of my people around me to pray and seek God right now. Daniel knew that true discipleship happened in the midst of small groups of people that gathered and pursued God wholly. We do that here at East Ellijay through a thing we call D groups, discipleship groups. We've got some amazing ones going on. If you are not a part of one, I urge you, see me. We will get you into one. We will get you started. We will make one happen. Groups of men and groups of women gathering together to do this right here. Right here, what Daniel knew was the truth and the reality of true discipleship didn't happen by coming on a Sunday morning and sitting in a seat or by doing an event well. Daniel knew that discipleship happened among other believers, holding each other accountable, where then, and only then, they were able to pursue God and say, God, we have the biggest thing we've ever had in our lives. We need you to tell us what this guy dreamt. I mean, come on. Daniel didn't do that alone. He brought people in with him and said, we need to pursue God wholly and firstly in prayer. I guess that's another made-up word, but firstly. We need to go to God first. We cannot do it on our own. And the only way to hear this amazing story, and the only way Daniel ever got to the point where he could stand in front of Nebuchadnezzar was because he went with a small group of people in true discipleship because he knew that's the way the Christian life was set up to be lived. So God did not call us to live in solidarity, but in unity. He made us to be in relationship with himself and relationship with others. Daniel understood that the way God intended for us to live as Christians was to enlist the help of other believers. So Daniel says, all right, don't kill us yet. I'm gonna give you the dream, but you got to give me time. Let me pursue my God, and we'll give it to you. And so then in the next part of Daniel, as we read, what Kyle read for us this morning was the interpretation of the dream. But before that happened, Daniel stood up and he said, all right, king, I'm going to tell you your dream. The only reason why that was able to happen is because Daniel positioned himself and took his opportunity to give the word to a world that needed him and introduce a world to God when they needed him. You see, we can live outside of the current culture as Christians. We can even go the next step and live with our end goal in mind in the world we live in. We can even enlist the help of others. But if we miss the opportunities when they arise, what are we doing? You see, Daniel, when the opportunity came up, Daniel was about to be killed. And he said, wait, hold on. I've got the answer. My God can give us the answer. Daniel didn't shut up when trouble arisen. Daniel didn't shut up. He pursued and ran hard into it, knowing the ultimate potential outcome. He said, I know the answer. My God has the answer. Just like Daniel, are you and I able to run into this world that needs the answer to be given to them? Or are we stepping back aside and we're saying, maybe somebody else can do it? Maybe one of the other wise men that has another answer, maybe they can. And let's be honest, I'm guessing, maybe Daniel and his friends were praying, Lord, give us the answer, or give somebody the answer at least so we don't have to be killed. But how often are we content to let other people around give false answers for the hope that they do not have when we have the hope? We have the hope that lies within us, and that hope is Jesus Christ. And yet when we have opportunities to make sure other people know that hope and know that message, how often do we run away and we shut up and we say, maybe somebody else can say something? You see, what made Daniel different, and the only reason why he had an opportunity to stand in front of one of the greatest men in Nebuchadnezzar, is because he took the opportunity when it arose and he didn't run away. In the latter part of Daniel chapter 2, the answer to what happens, the culmination to this whole thing, is the most beautiful part of this story. In verse 46 of Daniel 2, it says, real quick, let me just set the stage. We're talking about this king who has been searching and trying to run away from God and run away from the true answers. And he's given this dream and he needs the interpretation and all these things. He's ready to kill everybody that didn't get it right? That's the level to where this guy's at. Then Daniel tells him the dream. We'll get to that in a second, but here's what happens as a result of that. Verse 46. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and paid homage to Daniel, and commanded that an offering and incense be offered to him. Then the king answered and said to Daniel, "Truly your God is God of gods and Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this mystery." The response from Nebuchadnezzar when he saw God high and mighty and powerful was a result that showed worship. It was a result that showed humility of heart. Now, if you know the story of Nebuchadnezzar, you know that maybe didn't last so long, and he had to have a little bit extra help later on. But in this moment, Nebuchadnezzar was revealed the truth of who God is and the truth of what he could not accomplish on his own. And because of that gap in between, he saw that God came down and God filled that gap. And because of that, he worshiped. And he said, "You are King of Kings. You are holy. You are God." And he proclaimed God to be God. So what was the dream? What was the important? We've gotten this whole thing about this whole dream. So let's get to the dream. We'll put that picture right back up on the screen and with this image. In the interpretation of the dream, what Daniel says is, look, your kingdom represents this gold head, and then subsequently there's going to be kingdoms that conquer each one of yours. Sorry, get out of the way here. And every one that conquers the next one, it's going to be a little weaker and a little weaker. And if you read through there, what he describes is the material used to make the statue is not just weaker, but it's less valuable, all the way down to the feet when it's like a mixture of clay. It's basically like an ore that you could just dig up outside somewhere. It's not strong. And at the very end of the dream, what happens is a stone rolls down, and it says specifically a stone that's like it was been hewn out and carved out by a hand, comes and rolls and destroys the statue. And then in the subsequent, what it says is not just does it destroy the statue, but a new kingdom was set up that will not ever end. All right, let's land the plane. Let's wrap it up. What's the message? We see Daniel was able to give that message, right? Daniel was able to get there. Daniel was able to get to the point where he was able to share that message. But what is it? We've been taking this side quest, and we've been coming out, and now we're coming back around, and we're gonna put ourselves right back in line with the main message of Revelation here. God is winning in the end, and despite the best efforts of us as humans, whatever we try to do, God is winning in the end. And that's what Daniel says. He says, you know what happened in here, old King Neb? He says, no matter how hard you try, you have set yourself up. Well, you can see it in your minds. You can set yourself up. You can do everything that you can possibly try. And then not just you, but people to follow you are going to do everything they can. And Daniel says, let me tell you that man's best plans will only end in disaster. God, as the judge, God is represented by this ball of fire that comes in and destroys and then subsequently clears a path for a new kingdom to be set up. And Daniel says, no matter what you try to do, no matter how hard you try, no matter the effort you try, you will never succeed on your own. And so as we end our side quest and come back in, we see that Daniel was able to deliver this message, but Daniel was only able to deliver that message because he knew his true identity was not in the world he lived in. Subsequently, he then decided that because of his true identity, enabled him to live in the world that he should not be in, to pass on those truths. Daniel then knew that the only way to live in that world appropriately was to have the fellowship and the relationship of other believers. And then when the opportunity arose, he said, I'm going to speak the truth. And that truth is, no matter what you do, no matter how hard you try, you will never stand up to the power of God. Can we take the necessary steps to position ourselves in front of God with his power and in front of the world to give them the answers when the time is right? Can we set ourselves up to be in a place where we say, God, I'm going to take the opportunity, I'm going to put myself in line with you and your word, and I'm going to jump when you give me a chance to help somebody see the truth of Jesus. Jesus is winning in the end, no matter what we try, man's best efforts, and that's the message that the world around us needs to hear, because we are trying, and we're trying hard, and ultimately God is bringing judgment that will only end in his kingdom being built